Hello, welcome to the Death and All the Rest podcast, where we talk about life, death, and everything in between.
I think this topic is something that I brought up and that I really think about a lot. And I think we're probably going to range a little bit widely on this one, but we'll loop it back as much as possible.
Sure.
Traditionally, this has been called, like, one of the catchphrases for this is work-life balance.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it encapsulates a lot more about modern existence and concepts such as identity and loss of identity and loss of life. And this produces elements of avoidance and so on. But anyway, just to get to the point, I believe in the modern world that, and quite often our work predominates our life, predominates our relationships with our families, it predominates how we define our identity. And it's basically quite often predatorial. There is no end to this. And I'm just going to use my own example, and I know there's even worse ones out there. When I worked in the corporate world for 9.5, 10 years, I worked a minimum of 60 hours a week, quite often 80, sometimes 100. I was required to check my phone, the emails on my phone every half an hour. I was required to take a phone call from a client, no matter where I was, at 24/7, 365. And I've taken calls on Christmas and multiple calls on Christmas and Thanksgiving, things like that. I was also basically required to check my phone once in the middle of the night because a lot of my clients were global and from other places in the world. This required me to be good at this job. I had to buy into all that. I had to really lean into that experience and accept all that to do the job. And I was part of how I was so unhealthy and angry. And frankly, it ended up coloring like my values.
Sure.
I did things in that job that I would not do in my normal life, that I would say that I would never do. I did in that job. And I crossed my own boundaries. I was a habitual line stepper. And eventually I realized I was going to completely lose myself, my identity, the things that were most important to me. And then the alcohol was all wrapped up in this as well. And it was very exciting, very stressful, and I was very unhealthy. And I did it. I did it for a long, long time, 9, 10 years. There's people who work much harder than that, crazy as that sounds to me now, both physically and, intellectually, just time at a desk. And when I left that job and started to take care of myself in my life, I took a vow of poverty and said, I will not work more than 25 hours a week. I put myself in the semi-retirement for the second half of my life. And I've stayed there. And I do not. I was on my way to being a multimillionaire, and now I'm not. And I am much happier and fuller, and I feel myself. I know who I am again. It's totally been worthwhile. And I think I'm lucky because I didn't have a wife and kids to take care of. Or I had the opportunity to save up some funds and bail. I was not fully locked in and entrenched. I was psychologically fully locked in. And it took me years to make that breach. So I was kind of one of the lucky ones. And I think that this is a trend that has been going on in America for quite some time. You were speaking to that a little bit earlier. And I think it is not ending. I think it's basically almost like a war between capitalism and those of us who aren't capitalists.
You're speaking to some big points too, because you brought it up as like work-life balance. And I think the way that you were just talking about this really hits home the point of why this matters, is because you're talking about a loss of identity in work, and that's part of the balance. There's loss of identity, there's loss of your own purpose outside of your job. We exist as humans outside of our jobs, and then we get to be thinking about purpose and meaning and fulfillment and satisfaction outside of that. And when the work life balance is so upside down and tilted in this way where work is requiring the bulk of your waking hours, that's giving you no time to be thinking about yourself. And this is the existential piece, right? Because that's exactly what we talk about. Like when we talk about looking back on our life, that integrity versus despair part of the phases, that's a lot of times where it gets away from people because they've been so invested in the work part of life, they forgot about the balance. And I think it's you're even speaking to like your job required you, like it's one thing, it's not uncommon to hear someone say my job, I work 60 hours a week or something, right? Like, okay, that's crazy, and you hear that. But when you say stuff like answering the phone on holidays, okay, but having to check your phone in the middle of the night, like they're not just asking you to drop your boundaries, they're asking you to compromise your own basic needs, your own biological requirement for sleep. Like you have to be up in the middle of the night checking your emails. Or were you required to respond to emails in the middle of the night too?
Yeah.
So
I found
you're
something.
not just like, so you're not just checking if something's come in. You have to be able to be, you're up enough, cognizant enough to be responding to an email.
Yes.
So you're either pushing your sleep schedule off to not get much sleep, to be awake in the middle of the night to do that, or breaking and disrupting your sleep schedule because you're waking up in the middle of the night to fully be awake and present to respond to those emails.
Yes. That's true. That's what it was.
Yeah.
And that was defined as a valuable characteristic.
Sure. For them, it was so valuable, I bet. Having an employee that dedicated to their job, that is value.
They coded it as like as duty and responsibility and
Yeah.
nobility, right? And I
Yeah.
bought that shit. I hate
Because
it.
it was your but your identity had been lost, so the only piece of identity that you were holding on to was how valuable you were and how useful you were and how much of a benefit you were and how good you were at your job. Your identity is tied solely to your job at this point. So getting the reinforcement, this is a loop that it's creating because you're getting the reinforcement that like, yeah, dude, look how good you are at your job, the demand, the duty of it. You're so good at making sure that you're maintaining that. And you're like, fuck yeah, this is who I am. This is what I do. And then there's no need to exist outside of that. These confines are just being reinforced at every angle for you.
Yeah, I was self-exploiting. I was doing
Not
their work.
self-exploiting.
Huh?
Not self-exploiting. You were being exploited.
No, but I'd internalized it. And so
Yeah.
I was being exploited, absolutely. But
Yes,
then
yes, yes.
I had taken that in and made it my identity, and I was doing the hard work for them. I was
Oh, it's
reinforcing it on myself.
yes, it's the idea of yes, you started to do that and you took that on as your own value and your own way to like demonstrate your worth in the world. But it's like, I mean, it's akin to grooming. They
Yes.
groomed you to believe that that was where your value laid and that was what you had to offer. And then you were like, fuck yeah, I see it. This is my value. I'm good at this.
Yeah. And I'm literally crossing my own internal values that I grew up with and still believe in to this day. Like I was
Right.
anti-unionist when I was
Yeah.
there. And I was like saying this shit and like, who's saying this stuff? I am. And I was like, doing it. And you are
Yeah.
what you do,
Yeah.
to a very real extent. And that is the loss of the ability to define your existence. There's nothing, that's what we're talking about all the time here, is like trying to define our existence in our relationship with the singularity of life.
Mhm.
Um, according to a healthy model of our own creation and definition.
What's I have a question. What's like, I'm trying to think of how to word this. What is the psychological experience when you have a set of values that you know before you start this job that are at the core of who you are, then you are now taking on this job and have identified that this is who you are. These are your values. You know, these two things, these two sets of values are butting up against each other. What's that internal experience like? Did you notice it? Like, were you aware of it that they were like up against each other? Did you let go of the first set of values while you were in it? Like, what was that like?
Um, it was mixed. There was certainly moments of awareness and cognitive dissonance, where like this is
Mm-hmm.
wrong and this isn't who I am. A lot of
Yeah.
times the job was very exciting and strongly narrative. Like there was lots of crises to deal with and situations to deal with, and I found that very, very rewarding to me psychologically because of my own how my mind works with the ADHD and my poor working memory. I just have these great stories. We always used to talk about all these great stories, that these incredible maneuvers we pulled off. You know,
Yeah.
we defined our manhood, I guess, in a sense around that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and in that process, in that like excitement around that, across boundaries. And a lot of it was just creep. I was
Mm-hmm.
so distracted with the work and just executing the work that I wasn't noticing enough time to look at myself and see what I was doing and to like
Sure.
check myself. Because I do believe, um, living according to your values takes introspection. You gotta check your behavior. Are you doing the right thing? And that takes a little bit of mind power. So all those things were at play. But I certainly had moments where I was like, what the fuck? You
Yeah.
There were a couple of ones where they wanted me to do stuff that was corrupt and immoral.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and I did it on the scale that I found acceptable to me, in the sense that like um, I was willing to do it because for the reward of the money, and I just took it. But it eventually got to a point where I was like, no fucking way. Mm-mm. And that was part of like, in a sense, that was part of my bottom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean things like this, whether people can relate to this specific scenario that you're speaking to or not, I think that as humans, where we fall prey to this is when these sorts of jobs, and your job speaks to it in one way, but I've been in it in a different way in the mental health industry. Like there are people who across all different kinds of avenues, all different kinds of industries are experiencing this. It looks different, but the big thing is it's preying on our vulnerability, our susceptibility for something in one way. That's one hand of it. The other hand of it is, for you, what you're describing is it is highly serving these needs that you have. High stakes career. I need something that feels high stakes. I need something where I can be problem solving using my brain and I'm not just sitting at a desk. And this is hitting that while at the same time preying on the fact that, you know, you're casting your values aside. There's something in you that they're preying on. They're continuing to like stroke your ego to make you feel good about this. So you're getting lulled into this. It's like slowly dipping yourself into a bath of hot water, right? You do a little bit at a
Hmm.
time, and then eventually you can get all the way in, and you're like, okay, this is okay. This is okay. And I think this is a common thing. Like, this is something you and I have talked about off air, but like the a theme for me is in the mental health industry. What a big theme of like the preying is preying on, as a mental health professional, typically, I won't say everybody, but for the most part, we're big on like people, caring
Yeah.
about people. And they do this, you use this term, moral blackmail, right? And that does happen, this moral blackmail, where it's like, well, what do you mean you won't overextend? Like, these are people on the other side of this. Your job, people rely on you in a big way, people's well-being. And it's very predatory in that sense, it can
Mhm.
be. And so like it's different from job to job, but there's still like there's something that they catch. And I think this is leading me to a question for you actually as I'm saying this stuff out
Okay.
loud, because for me that's the naming it. It taps into this very compassionate empathetic piece for mental health providers of they hit us there of like, well, you should want to do this, you should want to be helping other people, even if it's asking you to compromise your time for yourself, your time with your family, your time to just enjoy life, but like you're helping people. So like what was it for you? What was what if you like could pinpoint one or two or even three of those themes, the like you said, moral blackmail, that like hits it, right? This you're coming at my ethics, my beliefs. So like what is it? What were they preying on with
What
you?
they turned against me, it was certainly a sense of loyalty and duty.
Yeah,
That was, and I think that's probably a very common one.
sure.
Um, there was money. It
Yeah,
was the money. Like the money was the prize. The money was the reinforcement. I made more money. The more I did it, the more money I made,
yeah.
and more leadership, power. I got power. I guess is a good way to put it. I rose. I had a very good reputation in that port as somebody who could handle crises
Mm-hmm.
until I fell apart. And then it was like, this guy's a fuck up. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and and so it was that. Those were the big things. And it was like, you want to be a capitalist, you want to be an executive, climb the ladder, social reinforcement. That was what I got sold on. And I got sold on it because I didn't have anything else. Um,
Sure.
and hard work. Are you a hard worker? Is a definition of strength as hustle culture, they call it now, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I wanted to be that strong, and I wanted to be the guy who could do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I was thinking it was those things,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I would imagine it's very very common. I was thinking, and this is not my realm at all. I was thinking about like hip hop music. I was
Mm-hmm.
listening to some at the gym today. Some kid was playing it. And all these songs, or at least quite a few of these, were about keeping my mind on my money and my money on my mind. And like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
always on point. You will never catch me slipping. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
One of the lines was something along lines of like, uh, if there's something that, wait, if there's something that can't be done that I can't do, they haven't found it yet. Something along those lines. And it was all like this very hardcore self validation and like this weird like gangster framework, I can't really speak to, but it's really about working hard and being
Yeah.
focused on top of their game.
Yeah. It, yeah. And I mean, that's a big part that I think my brain's going in two directions. So hold on, let me jot down the part that I want to bring it back to after this first
Sure.
thing. The first thing that I want to point out is one of the things that you brought up as like the preyed on principle is you said loyalty first. And that struck me because in an earlier episode, one of the ones where you were opening up and talking about like when you were a teenager and you were actually really seriously considering suicide and like planning suicide,
Yes.
you said that one of the big the reason you didn't do it was because it was, I can't remember exactly how you said it, but you said it was going against your your primary duty as a son to your
Yeah.
mom, to
Yes.
put her in that kind of pain. There is a sense of duty
Yes.
and a sense of loyalty in that, and I think that's a big theme for you.
Yes. Absolutely. I couldn't do that to her. I
Yeah.
wouldn't do that to her.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the interesting thing is when I believe, at least on some level, like maybe this is me like fucking my own head, but when I committed to that, the
Mm-hmm.
suffering went down a little bit, or
Yeah.
simultaneously is when the booze started going through the roof too, or started
Yeah.
the real upward.
Yeah. I mean, you took an option off the table because suicide is always an option.
Mm.
That's true. It is an option until you decided then and there that it's not. This is an option I don't have anymore. So I'm going to have to figure out how to live in this.
Yes. But I didn't individuate at that moment, at
Yeah.
that crucial moment, like 16 to
Hmm.
early 20s, right?
Yeah.
Um, and because I didn't individuate and like have my own, had my existence and my life plan kind of defined, I think that made me like, perfect prey for this job because
Sure. Yeah.
it ticked those boxes. It ticked the ADHD novelty risk reward box. It ticked the money box. It ticked the social climbing box, and all I had to give up was everything.
Yeah. Yep. And there's this, you cut off the option, but you defaulted to something to just help you get through. So there wasn't even then because you were starting to drink at 16 and stuff instead of ending your life. But then there wasn't this ability to like you were you were basically just trying to function in a survival mode. You had to be here. You decided that you have to be here and you're just trying to make it through that. So there is no higher level order stuff. There is no focusing on self-actualization and who you are and your identity. And then yeah, you get into this place and they see that and they're like, this guy's really gonna he's really gonna take this in this duty, this responsibility for duty. This is perfect.
We can squeeze this guy dry,
Mm-hmm.
is what they say.
Mm-hmm.
I remember my boss one time telling me, he's like, I know I don't need to give you the biggest bonus because you're not in this for the money. You're in this for something else. And I was like, wait, I am in this for the
No.
money, motherfucker. Uh, but he was right too. I was in it because
Yeah.
I was my identity, and I was desperate to like be worthwhile.
Yeah. Yeah. The second direction my brain was going with this, when I mentioned like I'm thinking of two things at the same time, what I wanted to circle back to, because you were
Mm-hmm.
talking about like the rap songs at the gym and what you heard, and this mentality of like, hustling, grinding, like this is the and I think um, that's a common thing that we've seen. Like specifically, if we look generationally, there are some differences, and there's some really interesting breakdown as it pertains to the workforce over the decades and generations, because we're both raised by boomer generation people. Our parents are both boomers, even though you and I are different generations. Our parents are both of the boomer generation,
Yeah.
and there was very much this mentality that like you get in this job somewhere in your early maybe to mid 20s, like that's your career, you've chosen your career now, and you're saying put, you're going to demonstrate that you are loyal, that you are capable, that you are going to climb the ladder, whatever it is, and you're going to stay here, you're going to ride it out at that point, say you ride it out to your 60s when people could actually retire in their 60s, you're going to ride it out for 40-ish years, and then have a kick-ass pension and retirement, and that was what life was going to look like, and whatever demands they placed on you at that job, you were going to do them because you committed. This was your job and this is how it went. And then there's like the interesting stuff that we're seeing. This is not just you and I talking about
Mm-hmm.
this. Like this is stuff that we're seeing trends on social media popping up. People are talking about this all the time. But Gen Z, people talk about them like quiet quitting, you know, and quitting without giving notice. And there's this huge juxtaposition between Boomer generation and Gen Z, where Gen Z is like, I'm not, I see you. I see you for what this is. Like, I'm not letting you take advantage of me. I got other stuff outside of life that matters to me, outside of work that matters to me in life. And I'm focusing on that. And I know you are not going to give me any kind of consideration to give me 2 weeks notice if you're going to fire me. And if you're treating me poorly, I'm just going to quit. And I'm not saying whether I'm like, this is good or this is not, but this is just like, this is what's happening, versus the boomers who are like, you can treat me however you want. I have committed to this job. And then I think for a lot of for the generation in between, for Gen X and the millennials, we had been in between all of that. Like we weren't doing quiet quitting. We weren't necessarily quitting without notice. Obviously, I'm lumping us all into categories because there are
Sure.
always outliers to all of this, but as a generation. But what we were doing is we weren't staying in jobs if they were making us miserable or if we were running out of room to grow or whatever was happening. We weren't like the loyalty and the commitment was conditional. We recognized that
Mm-hmm.
it was conditional and that we didn't just blindly owe that to somebody. So like we stayed in jobs less long
Mm-hmm.
than the boomers were. This wasn't like I'm locked into a career in my 20s and I'll ride it out for 4 decades. And I think it's really interesting to see that demonstrates to me, the reason I'm bringing that up is that demonstrates to me that there is more awareness around um, work life balance and this being crucial because, you know, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, this was not a thing that people cared about at all. Working,
No.
making money, that's like that wasn't what was happening. And you know, this is a little bit of like the system kind of getting dismantled because these younger
Oh yeah.
generations as they come up and they come up and they come up, there's this evolution to the mindset around work and the value of that and the value of life and everything outside of work. And I think I'm just naming that, and I'm also going to name that it makes me very hopeful for these people because this is in the existential realm of what we talk about. They're going to have so much more room for thinking about what they want to get out of life.
Yeah. This may be cyclical. I
Yeah,
think
it might
this.
be.
I think it probably tracks with the growth of capitalism in an overarching sense, which is just greed, greed and power madness. But inequality, and the last time the inequality was this bad was the Great Depression. But like right now, if you think about it, you talked about the boomers, right? Well, the boomers, one person could work 40 hours a week, and
Yeah.
then you would have all that other work thrown on the woman, and she did all the other living labor to make a
Yeah.
family work, and that
Mm-hmm.
freed up the guy. And maybe that model worked in that sense. I'm not saying it's a good one.
Right.
But then I remember seeing this over the course of my parents' life, where my dad was initially the breadwinner, and he did well. He did well, then he did even better. But eventually, my mom got a small job, then a bigger job, and then a bigger job, and then eventually she was off to the races, corporate executive, just like him, working crazy hours,
Yeah.
very high stress. Um, and now this younger generation, they like they got like what is it that's happened where their gig economy came into play, where like first like they got rid of the pensions and they became 401k, so now they get to make money off the playing with your retirement, and if you get screwed,
Mm-hmm.
fuck you. And
Mm-hmm.
then now the kids, like, they don't even have enough job to pay a living wage, and cost of living still goes up. And so in a sense that social contract has been broken. It has been violated, top down, not bottom up. And the unions have died, and they're still playing the same bullshit story, to us. And the kids are like, man, we could see through this illusion. You're not gonna
Mm-hmm.
fucking you can't game me anymore because it's abundantly clear that
Yeah,
it's
we're not
bullshit.
blind.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So something's got to give.
Yeah.
Um, it should be them.
And you're hitting some good points too because it's not just, I was talking about it and saying like the evolution over the generations and then there's the shift in mindset around work life balance, but it's not just that. You just nailed it. It is that like these jobs are giving us less. They're giving us less income compared to like the cost of living and what a livable wage is. There's less of that, like working 40 years and you get an awesome pension and you get retirement I mean, by the time we retire, we may not even have Social Security. Like that's a very real possibility.
We may not have Social Security in 3 months. Like they're trying to
Okay,
take it
yes,
all right now.
yes, and that's not what it was like when the boomers were our age and they were working. So there's been a change to the industry, the working industry for people too, and people are getting they're attuned to it, they're seeing it, they're watching it, they're seeing that people, the housing market, people like achieving that American dream of getting a house has been in high decline in the millennial generation specifically. Like that's where it's really hit. And the Gen Z kids are like, well, fuck that.
Yeah,
Like what? And people, what I think is always really interesting too is people love to criticize. They're
yeah,
lazy. They have no work ethic. And I'll tell you, I like that's not true. It's
yeah.
just not true. They just see they, like you said, they're seeing through the bullshit of it. My niece is 15, so she I mean she is a softball player. She's not working or anything at this point. Softball is what she does, but like she's on two teams outside of school. She's just got on the school her school team, and she had a JV, and she's a freshman, and then she's gonna play for varsity too, like as a backup.
Mhm.
And she does like these pitching classes a couple of times a week. Like she's invested in the thing that she is invested in, and where she sees payoff, she gets on these teams. She's starting pitcher on these teams. When it's worth it, they're going to put in the work, but they're just seeing through all of the smoke and mirrors that that's set up to say like, oh well, have a job and stay in this job and work yourself to the bone and let go of your boundaries, but it doesn't even pay a wage that I can live on. Like they're just rejecting that. And I think that like honestly, that might just make them a little bit smarter than us and a lot more aware.
Good. Well,
Good.
it's not like the system is like recognizing this and saying we need to change. It's
Yeah, they're
recognizing
not.
this and saying we need to take away their freedoms so they don't have a choice.
Yep. And the cost of living's going up. Groceries are unaffordable. Housing's unaffordable. Good. Good. Because
Yeah,
then they'll have to have these jobs, and they'll have
yeah,
to. People will have to work two jobs. People with a dual income will still have to be working two jobs each to make this happen. And then they wonder why there's a decline in people having families,
yeah.
because if you can't afford, like if you can't afford to live on your own as a couple, who wants to bring kids into that? And then that's another expense. Like, but it's this question of how, why isn't this happening?
Think about it like this for a second. I just thought of this myself. Like the decision to not to have a child in that formula that you just talked about, where you don't have enough to pay your own bills, to build a home um, with the family, is a moral
Mm-hmm.
good. That is a value judgment that I believe is morally sound. So you're doing the right thing because you want to bring that kid into this world where you won't be there to parent it
Mm-hmm.
because you're going to be working your ass off, and you
Yeah.
can't feed it, and you can't have a shelter for it. Like these are the most basic things on Maslow's hierarchy, right? So you decide,
Literally.
I just won't do it because I can't. And it's not like these kids are going off and being like, well, fuck all this, I'm just going to party. The, there's apathy, there's
Mm-hmm.
sadness, and there's disillusion with all this. So this isn't laziness. That's what they want to code it as, because
Sure.
so they can go on the
It makes them
attack.
the problem.
Makes them the problem instead
Right.
of the system, instead of the situation that they've created. They want to
Right.
go back to some kind of feudal society where we're all serfs. We have very little actual freedom, and they can just
Mm-hmm.
squeeze, because it's never enough. It's the definition of capitalism. We always need more growth, and it's just not going to work anymore. It is a system that has a failure point.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is tough. I feel very lucky right now because of the life I have,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I feel very worried
Mm-hmm.
about those kids. But on the other hand, like this is where fucking people get funky with it. And
This is the revolution.
this is where revolutions happen. And if
Mm-hmm.
I can go there here, and I will because I want to, uh,
Because you can do
because
it.
I can. This is why Luigi Mangione
Oh yeah,
has
dude.
become the Robin Hood of his time,
Yeah.
and they've just in all the little maneuvers around this socially from the people in power have been very telling. They think that they're like, oh no no no, this is bad bad bad, and then people are like, fuck you, I'm from the right and the left. They're like, oh shit, that didn't work. We can't turn the right and the left against each other on this. Get it off the
And
news. And but they're like,
yeah.
no, we're gonna keep bringing him up, and it's fascinating.
And I've had lots of people that I've had conversations with about Luigi Mangione, and um, I get where he was coming from. I'm not saying that it's okay. I'm not saying it's not okay. I'm not going to say to have an opinion. Would I have done it myself? No. Do I get where he was coming from? Yeah. And what I tell people all the time is like, when people are desperate and they feel like they have nothing left to lose, this is the shit that's going to happen. And
Yes.
this is what the system is creating in us and these people at this, middle class and under level of living. They're creating desperation, and there's nothing left to lose in us because we cannot even afford, so many of us, basic needs, shelter and food, and or sleep, because we're working our asses off to make money to be able to survive, so we're not getting sleep. Like, there's all these things that are cyclical and happening and lending to each other about it. And this is the shit that they don't realize. Like, this is where people are going to and not necessarily like exactly the same stuff, but this is where revolution is going to be more likely to happen, because people are like, why not?
Yes.
I
Yeah.
got nothing else.
Yeah. Their backs are against the wall.
Yeah.
And they
A
keep
caged
telling us,
animal does what? It's going to strike against you. It's going to bite you when you reach in at it.
yeah. Before Trump came along and just like wrecked it all, in this last second Trump administration, if you want to call it that,
Yeah.
I call it a criminal enterprise. Um, with Biden, it's like, oh, we're doing great again. Build Back Better, IRA Act, the economy's booming. We avoided a recession, put it off on the rest of the world, but we avoided it. And like all these people are bitching and they're like doing great. They were not doing great. The economy was doing well, very well. The stocks were doing well, but the average person's life was continuing to be squeezed. And they were like, oh, well, they're starting to make, we're seeing gains in their salaries. Wages were increasing, but the wages are so fucking far behind that little
So
blip
far behind.
then, as it caught up to the current trend, meant nothing, and they got
Hurt.
hammered. Oh man.
When I was 15, I started working. It was my first job. I worked at a grocery store in PA where I grew up, and I made 5.25 an hour.
Wow.
That was what the wage was. And then when I was 16, I had a different job and I made 6.25 an hour. The minimum wage had gone up. When I was 17, I got another job. I was working at Arby's. It went up, and I remember this so easily because I was 16 and it was 6.25. I was 15 and it was 5.20. It was going up with my age, so I was making 7.25 an hour, and then it halted. And to this day in PA, the minimum wage is 7.50.
Yeah.
And I was 17 in 2007. That's almost 20 years ago, and it went up 25 cents
Yeah.
in the last almost 20 years.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, those wage increases do nothing when, like, did the economy did the cost of living stop rising for those 20 years? It sure as hell didn't.
No.
So like, even if you're giving people an increase where they're making $5 more an hour, okay, so if the minimum wage is 7 and they're making 12 now, but the cost of living has gone up to, if we're going with the same proportion, to what would be the equivalent to $25 an hour, that's still not enough.
Yeah. And the money that they're fighting for, the Democrats say they're fighting for, but they never do, never pass, is, $25 an hour is a new minimum wage, right? And that's already outdated. They never did it,
Yeah.
you know?
Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing too. Like, I think that gets people up in arms too. And I get that response to an extent, But the thing is, if the minimum wage is, because some people are like $25 an hour at minimum wage, like, to flip a burger. When I make that at my job and I went to school or I had specific training for this or I've been in the industry for a decade, and it's like, yeah, but then if the minimum wage is $25 an hour, your wage should increase based on that percentage rate too. Like you should be making more money. So if you're not, your anger is not at the people who are just trying to make minimum wage to be able to keep up with the cost of living. Your anger is at your employer and at the larger system who's not giving you more money to
Sure.
demonstrate your value. That's the problem.
And if the money goes back into the system anyway, they get paid more, they spend more on their quality of life.
Sure.
But that's not what they want. When I say they, I mean all these different power players at different
Yeah.
levels. And the fact that it's becoming, the top is becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, whether the monopolization of corporations, like, we had hundreds of newspaper companies in this country. Now we have like five, or the same thing with media in general, which
Mm-hmm.
is another story. Um,
Mm-hmm.
or just the oligarchs. They want it all. They don't just want their money. They want your money. They want every single bit of it. And
Well, there's evidence for that. You're a billionaire, and then there are people who are homeless and can't afford any kind of basic needs. Like they're hoarding.
yeah.
They're hoarding. And I like, does anyone deserve to be a billionaire? A
No,
billionaire? Like when we have people who don't have housing, that's
yes,
like, where are our values?
no. And this is not because they're geniuses or they work super hard. All of these guys, and they're mostly guys, came from extreme wealth already, or at least moderately wealthy. And then as they got more powerful, they gamed the system. They broke
Sure.
the system into their benefit, whether it's, creating tax havens, offshoring, whatever, or getting government subsidies. That's socialism for the rich, capitalism for the poor shit.
Yeah.
But if this is your everyday life, and you're living in this world now, and you're not one of those people, and you're not, uh, this is a lot. This is a lot of stress. This is a lot of feelings of hopelessness, of
Mm-hmm.
anger, of frustration, probably of self-loathing. Just this
Sure.
sucks, and I hate my life, and I hate me.
And probably a lot of existentialism because people are like,
Yeah,
how do I even do this? How do I even continue living in this state where like my standard well-being is compromised?
yeah, yes. There's no faith. Why? It's a crock of shit, and we all know it.
Mm-hmm.
So what do
There,
we do?
yeah, there's this term that I use, and it's actually like super prominent in a lot of the the clients that I'm working with right now in the coaching practice. Is I use this term, and I think I may have made it up, but it's one that I like because
Go,
I
go.
see it so fitting, and I refer to it as a reverse nervous system, and it's this
Interesting.
idea that so many people are running with a reverse nervous system because when like when we're under stress, we're under high levels of stress. There's high levels of cortisol coursing through our body, which I think a lot of us are under high levels of stress right now. And then with that, like typically with the reverse nervous system, when I'm talking about it with the people that I work with, it's typically people who are used to under pressure or chaos or external factors being able to just fucking pull it off, to function, to do like high levels of achieving. And then what's happening is they're crashing and they're hitting a wall because none of it is like intrinsic. None of it is for them. And they've not been taking care of themselves because
Okay.
they've been prioritizing their job or other people above themselves. And they're actually operating in I talk about this in a webinar that I've been doing, but like the hierarchy of needs, we love to
Mhm.
talk about this, one of
Yeah.
our favorite reference points, but it's a pyramid. So people with reverse nervous systems are operating with an upside down hierarchy of needs because they're reaching into levels of esteem
Yeah.
about how other people are perceiving them and their value and their respect in professional realms a lot of the time. They're also putting into their relationships and their families and their friends and making sure that they're getting what they need from them. but they're not taking care of themselves. Basic needs, they're not taking care of themselves as far as like uh, meditation and self reflection and things like that. So when you think about that, this model, I love the hierarchy of needs for this as it supports what I preach about the reverse nervous system. Because if the hierarchy of needs is a pyramid and it's upside down, that shit is not stable.
No.
Is not stable. It's going to topple over.
Yeah.
That's the reason it's a pyramid, because this is the bottom. It's not the foundation, and it's not meant to be sitting on its head. And
Right.
that's where people, the people that I'm working with a lot around this, is they hit that wall of like, all of a sudden they come to me and they're like, I don't know what happened. I've always been a high functioner, high achiever. I get shit done. And all of a sudden, I don't fucking care about any of it. I care about
Yeah.
nothing. And I'm like, of course you do. Of course you do.
Yeah.
We got to put your nervous system back in the way it's meant to function, because what they're doing, cortisol makes us, this is just like a fun fact, cortisol makes our brain, when we have that happening in our brain sees that as we're in survival mode. So it focuses on putting all of its energy stores into survival mechanisms for us, which means that higher cognitive level functioning is done. Like our hippocampus is offline, our prefrontal cortex is offline. We're not accessing that, which is where it becomes really hard to like engage in problem solving, be able to think and learn new information and all of that kind of stuff that comes with higher level cognitive functioning. And if you think about that in the same way of like everything else that we're asking our body to do, we're not giving it anything that it needs. And then we're just having it spread itself thinner and thinner to give to other people and these other responsibilities. And then simultaneously, we're tapping into higher level cognitive functioning, even though that's not the natural way that our brain works when we have cortisol flooding it. So what you're doing is making your brain function spread even thinner. And typically you're tapping into cognitive functioning that's like defense mechanisms, right?
Sure.
You're intellectualizing, you're rationalizing, you're justifying, you're compartmentalizing, but you're still doing that in a way that pulls you away from survival mechanisms, which is once again pulling you away from your brain taking care of itself.
Wow. That's a very very specific form of dissociation. This is why
Yes.
people feel divorced from their bodies. We talk about that so much right now.
That is one of the most common thing with the people that I'm talking about. I have so many people on my caseload are this, because this is this is my specialty.
Yeah.
And like this is the common problem. It's that people who said like, I'm so disconnected from my body, I don't know what I'm feeling ever.
Yeah. And
And it
I'm a
does, it
hyper functioning
dissociates.
individual.
Yes, until
Yeah.
you're not. Until you're not.
Until you're
Because yeah,
not.
you can ride that wave of high functioning for so like you did. You were
Yeah.
there. You
Yes.
personally. You can do that. You can ride that wave until you can't, because it's all going to come crashing down, because our
Yeah.
body is going to go, I've got nothing that I
Yes.
have needed.
Yes.
And whether that's been a year or that's been 30 years, and
Yeah.
I'm done. I
Yeah.
got nothing left to give you. You've been riding me on fumes, and your girl is done.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, the stronger you are, the bigger the debt you're going to have to pay back
To yourself.
to yourself.
To yourself.
Or you'll just go far enough that they'll get everything out of you if you're, employee, and then they'll just get rid of you. And then you're
Yeah, because then they'll
fucked.
see your lack of function as
Failure.
they have squeezed you dry for what you've been saying. Like they squeeze you dry, you got nothing left to give, you're useless to them now. So
Yeah. What we used to say is the strongest horse gets worked the most, and then it gets sent to the glue factory.
yep.
This is fascinating. This is like stuff to talk amongst yourselves. Like this
Yes.
is the shit that you should be talking about, because this allows me to wrap it back around to self-care, this and community, and like
Yes.
we want to extract that dependency on the system from them and put it back in ourselves and in our bodies and in our local communities, so that we don't have to go that far overboard, just so that we
Yes.
have a solid base that we can stand on. And especially if every shit comes tumbling down, which it seems like it very well may, certainly in the short term, probably in the long term too, and it'll be mixed. But if you have a strong, healthy body and community, and you're growing your own veggies, or your community's growing in its own veggies, and it's got its own local government, and it's got its own like in the real world entertainment and forms of connection,
Mhm.
you'll be much more prepared and resilient, and I bet happy.
Totally. Yeah, focus on your smaller systems, and that's like the internal systems, and then that's your immediate, like your social support system. But like that's really where you're gonna have benefit to
Yeah.
you. And this is why you and me, we stress the idea of self-care so much in these podcast episodes, in the work that we do with our clients, because there is a very real psychological, emotional, behavioral, and physiological impact on us that over time, that wear and tear shuts it. That's burnout. That's when people get that point of burnout. That's what's happened.
Yeah, and it's tough to rebuild.
It's hard to rebuild because you're starting from, you've essentially burned it down, and then it's all ash now, and you're trying to build on top of that, where like if you can catch it at any spot, like intercept anywhere above before it's actually completely burnt to ash, that's just going to make it a little bit easier. It's still possible to do it once
Yes.
we're
Yeah.
in the ashes. That's the phoenix rising, right?
Yeah.
We can still do it, but if you can catch it before it gets there, all the better.
And there's multiple systems that you have to work on. And so when you have multi-system failure, it is tough. So you just
Yeah.
have to get started and
Yes.
build and rebuild. But you should
Yep.
do it. You should do it for yourself.
Yep. And this is where we like to invite, like you can comment on these episodes in comments for anyone listening, and ask like what are specific means of self-care, or what are things that you do that you consider self-care, and how can we help you balance that, because there's productive self-care and there's restorative self-care. And ironically, the people with reverse nervous systems tend to default to productive self-care because that's what makes them feel like they're getting something done, but they actually are the ones who need to lean into more of the restorative self-care. So hit
Yeah.
us up.
They have to flip this on its head, which actually you're
Yeah.
not flipping it on its head. You're putting it back on its feet
Yes.
because you've been
Yes.
living
We're
on
in
your
that
head.
pyramid, so it's a foundational. Like pyramids do not exist upside down.
Yeah. Yes. You've been standing on your head the entire time.
Yeah.
Stop. Get your
Yeah.
feet grounded. Work on the basics.
That's right.
Okay. I think that one wrapped
Cool.
up good.
I think it did. Yeah. Hell yeah. Close it out.
All right. Thank you so much for coming. The Deaf and All the Rest podcast. Thank you over there. Thank you over there. Thank you in the back. Please discuss this amongst yourselves. Ask us questions. This is what we do. And we see this a lot and desperately want to help you deal with this shit.
Yep.
All right. Thank
Good.
you. Bye.